In the burning dust of Mesopotamia, an army of just 47,000 stood face to face with a sea of steel. Across the horizon, 250,000 men, war elephants, chariots, cavalry, and the pride of an ancient empire, waited to crush them. Most commanders would retreat. Most kings would surrender. But this wasn't most kings. This was Alexander the Great, and today, history would decide who ruled the world. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who loves history. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The world Alexander inherited was not peaceful. It was divided between rising powers and fading legacies. Persia, once unstoppable, still controlled vast lands stretching from the Aegean Sea to the borders of India. For centuries, Greek cities carried a wound. The memory of Persian invasions, burned temples, crushed rebellions, and tribute paid in fear. Alexander grew up listening to those stories. As a boy, he studied under philosophers. As a teenager, he trained with soldiers. And as a king, he believed one truth: history remembers only those who dare. His campaign across Asia had already stunned the world. He shattered armies larger than his own, stormed fortified cities, and moved with such speed that enemies collapsed under shock alone. But Persia's king, Darius III, was not finished. He gathered everything: generals, nobles, mercenaries, allies, a force so massive that rumors said the earth itself trembled beneath it. Alexander's scouts returned with terrifying news: 250,000. Open plains prepared to favor Persian chariots. A battlefield chosen to destroy him, his officers argued. Some begged him to fall back into safer terrain. Others whispered that winning was impossible. Alexander listened, silently, then looked at the horizon and answered in words that chilled them. "If we turn back now, the world turns its back on us." The night before the battle, Persian camps glowed with thousands of fires, feasts, music, and confident voices. They believed tomorrow would be a celebration, the day a young Macedonian king would finally be crushed. But in Alexander's camp, the atmosphere was different. Calm, focused. His men sharpened spears, checked shields, and whispered prayers. These weren't soldiers fighting for gold. They followed a leader they believed could bend fate. Alexander walked among them, not as a distant king, but as a brother in arms. He spoke softly, reminding them they had crossed rivers no army dared to cross. They had broken walls thought unbreakable. And tomorrow they would stand not as many, but as one. He slept peacefully that night. Darius did not. Dawn came, red, fierce, and merciless. Dust lifted, cavalry formed, shields locked, and the plains of Gaugamela prepared to witness something the world would never forget. Because this wasn't just a battle. It was the moment where strategy would challenge numbers, where discipline would face chaos, and where a single commander's mind would weigh more than an empire's might. And Alexander, calm, calculating, relentless, was ready. When the sun rose, the plain revealed the truth. The Persians had chosen Gaugamela carefully, wide, flat, cleared of rocks so their scythed chariots could slice through enemy lines like knives through cloth. The ground had been leveled by thousands of laborers. Every inch of it was designed for one purpose: to trap Alexander. Darius III stood elevated on a royal chariot, surrounded by elite guards. Banners snapped in the wind. War elephants towered. Cavalry wings stretched wider than the eye could follow. His army looked endless, like a living sea. For the Persians, the message was simple: numbers win wars. But Alexander didn't believe in numbers. He believed in control. He rode his horse Bucephalus to the front. His bronze armor shimmered in the light. His presence calmed the Macedonians, not with promises, but with certainty. He pointed toward the Persian lines and spoke to his commanders with quiet confidence. "Today we do not fight for land. We fight for the future." He formed his men into the weapon he trusted most: the Macedonian phalanx. 16 ranks deep, long spears, sarissas, angled forward like a forest of iron. Behind them, reserve troops waited to plug gaps. Archers prepared to darken the sky with arrows. But Alexander had something far more dangerous than formation. He had a plan. He began to move, not forward, but diagonally, slowly drifting his army right across the plain. To Darius, it looked like Alexander was trying to escape. Persian commanders grew excited. This was exactly what they wanted: force the Macedonians into open ground and crush them. Darius gave the order. Persian cavalry thundered forward, kicking up storms of dust, trying to encircle Alexander's flank. Chariots were unleashed, blades whirling at terrifying speed, slicing toward the Macedonian line. The ground shook. The noise became unbearable. This was the Empire's full strength. The Macedonians didn't panic. At the last second, they opened small lanes, got precise, disciplined. The chariots rushed through the gaps, suddenly surrounded, cut off, useless. Spearmen turned, drivers were dragged off, horses stabbed, wheels shattered. What was meant to break the line instead dissolved into chaos. Alexander's officers exchanged quick glances. The plan was working. By drifting right, he had stretched the Persian line. Their center, where Darius stood, began to thin. Soldiers moved away to reinforce their flanks, leaving a gap forming like a wound opening in the heart of the army. Alexander waited. Patience, timing. Control. He knew that one wrong move meant annihilation. But one perfect move could change the world. Meanwhile, the Persian cavalry pressed harder. Arrows whistled, dust blinded the horizon. Macedonian shields rang like drums. Still the formation held, rigid, disciplined, unbreakable. Darius watched nervously from his chariot. This wasn't how the battle was supposed to unfold. Alexander wasn't being crushed. He was guiding the Persians exactly where he wanted them. And then, in the critical moment, Alexander turned to his elite companion cavalry, eyes blazing. Now! They formed a wedge beside him, a spear made of men and horses. Not thousands, only hundreds. But in the right hands, that was enough. Bucephalus surged forward. The wedge accelerated faster and faster, cutting through the battlefield like a lightning strike. They weren't heading for the flanks. They were driving straight toward the thinning Persian center, directly at the King of Kings. It was a gamble that bordered on madness. If the wedge broke, the Macedonians would be swallowed whole. If it succeeded, an empire could fall in a single charge. The gap widened, and Alexander, standing in the stirrups, lowered his spear. History held its breath. The Macedonian wedge tore forward, dust exploding beneath hooves. Shields clashed, armor flashed, and suddenly the battlefield narrowed to a single focus. Alexander, charging straight for Darius. Persian officers yelled orders, scrambling to protect their king. Elite guards rushed to form a wall of spears and shields. Arrows rained like a storm. Yet Alexander didn't slow down. To his companions, fear no longer existed. They had followed him across deserts, mountains, and rivers. They trusted his judgment more than their own instincts. They were not charging blindly. They were striking at the mind of the enemy. Because in ancient warfare, killing soldiers didn't always win battles. But breaking the king, that shattered empires. Alexander crashed into the Persian line with brutal force. The wedge pierced forward, splitting shields, throwing men aside, punching deeper and deeper toward the royal chariot. Bucephalus reared, spears thrust. Swords flashed. The roar of war became deafening. Some Persian units fought fiercely. They weren't cowards, they were defending their world. But their formation was stretched, pulled, and confused. Orders conflicted. Some units didn't even know what was happening at the center. Darius watched the chaos closing in. He had prepared for victory. He hadn't prepared for Alexander. According to ancient sources, a spear flew past him. Another chariot overturned, horses panicked. Guards pushed the king to safety. He could see Macedonian cavalry only moments away, and in that instant, instinct overcame pride. Darius turned his chariot. He fled. Rumors spread through the battlefield at lightning speed. The king is gone. The king has abandoned us. And in that moment, more devastating than any sword, the Persian spirit fractured. Across the lines, soldiers hesitated. Commanders shouted desperately. Some units still fought bravely. Others began to fall back, and others simply broke, throwing down shields, running for survival. Alexander saw the psychological collapse and pushed harder. But his victory was not yet secure. Because while the center was crumbling, Persian cavalry on the opposite flank had broken through and threatened the Macedonian camp. There were civilians there, camp followers, supplies, wounded men. The threat was real. Some Macedonian troops looked back, torn between protecting their families and continuing the attack. Alexander made the decision only a true strategist would make. He didn't chase Darius, and not yet. He wheeled his forces back to stabilize the line, refusing to let chaos swallow his army. Control mattered more than glory, and by the time he restored order, the Persians had lost their chance. Their king had vanished. Their formation was broken. Their confidence was dead. When Alexander finally turned again toward the field, the Persians were no longer fighting. They were surviving. The chase resumed, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Everywhere the Macedonians advanced, resistance folded. The battlefield was covered in abandoned shields, broken spears, and the silence of defeat. This wasn't just the failure of an army. It was the unraveling of an empire. And yet, for Alexander, the moment carried no celebration. He understood what had really happened. Not numbers, not luck, but leadership, discipline, and timing. The message echoed across the ancient world. Sometimes one decision can rewrite history, but the story doesn't end here. Because after Gaugamela, Alexander stood on the edge of something even greater, a world that now lay open before him, and a destiny that demanded more than victory. The dust settled slowly over Gaugamela, but the consequences moved faster than any army. News of Darius's flight raced across the Persian lines like wildfire. Whatever courage remained dissolved into fear. Commanders abandoned positions, soldiers scattered across the plains. The once mighty imperial force, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, was now a storm of confusion. Alexander regained full control of his formations, then advanced carefully. He was ruthless but never reckless. Bodies lay everywhere, shields cracked. Spears snapped, war chariots smashed beyond repair. Lost horses ran wild, their riders gone. For the men walking across the battlefield, it felt surreal. They had faced impossible odds, and survived. Yet victory carried weight. Alexander rode through his lines, praising soldiers by name, lifting morale, recognizing bravery. To him, every man mattered. They were not expendable tools. They were the reason he could challenge the world. But beyond pride, there was calculation. He understood something essential. The battle was only the beginning of the end, not the end itself. Because Persia was not just an army. It was roads, fortresses, cities, treasuries, and loyal satraps scattered across vast lands. Even defeated, it could regroup unless Alexander acted with precision. Meanwhile, Darius fled east, ashamed, humiliated, desperate to rebuild. He sent messages to allies, calling Alexander a tyrant and demanding support. But fear had already infected the empire. Many provincial leaders began asking themselves quietly, who is the real king now? Alexander marched forward, not allowing the Persians time to recover. Towns opened their gates. Some governors swore loyalty. Others resisted and paid the price. At every step, Alexander balanced force with diplomacy, punishing betrayal and rewarding loyalty. But entering the Persian heartland brought another challenge: temptation. Luxurious palaces, endless wealth, golden halls filled with treasures collected over centuries. His soldiers walked through rooms decorated with jewels, silk, and perfumes. Many believed the campaign should end there. We have defeated Persia, they thought. Why keep going? Yet Alexander refused to stop. He wasn't simply destroying an empire, he was reshaping it. He adopted Persian administrative systems, respected local traditions, and even allowed defeated nobles to serve under him. This shocked many Macedonians, who saw Persia as their ancient enemy. Some whispered that their king was becoming more Persian than Greek. But Alexander had a vision beyond revenge. He dreamed of a unified world, where Greek military discipline merged with Persian administration, culture, and wealth. A world where his name would outlive monuments. Still, in the shadows, danger remained. Darius was alive. Persian loyalists were regrouping. New armies were forming in the east. And until Darius was captured or defeated once and for all, the war could not truly end. Alexander pressed on, faster and deeper than anyone expected, through deserts, across mountains, chasing a king who was losing allies by the day. And across the empire, people whispered, "The empire that ruled for centuries has fallen, and a new world is being born." But legends come with a cost. As Alexander pursued his destiny, cracks began to form, inside his army, inside conquered lands, and inside his own heart. Because conquering the world is one thing, ruling it is something entirely different. The Battle of Gaugamela shattered Persia's power, but it did not yet erase its king. Darius III, once the ruler of the largest empire on earth, fled deeper into the east with a shrinking circle of loyal commanders. His chariot rolled through deserts and mountains, not toward triumph, but toward survival. He carried one fear that never left him: Alexander was coming. And Alexander moved with terrifying speed. His forces marched through ancient cities, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, each loaded with unimaginable wealth. Treasuries opened, gates fell. The world felt like it was collapsing into his hands. But even in victory, Alexander's thoughts remained fixed. Darius must be confronted, alive, if possible. He wanted legitimacy, not just conquest. If the Persian king surrendered publicly, the empire would truly transfer into Alexander's hands. If Darius died in chaos, rebellions might continue for years, so the pursuit never slowed. Through scorching heat and freezing nights, the Macedonian army followed the king's trail. Scouts brought fragments of news. Darius was losing authority. Governors turned their backs. Even his own nobles questioned whether loyalty was worth dying for. And then, fate turned cruel. A group of Persian satraps led by Bessus decided the empire was safer without Darius. They arrested him, proclaimed themselves defenders of Persia, and planned to negotiate their own power with Alexander. When Alexander finally reached the abandoned royal camp, he received the news he did not want to hear. Darius was dead, killed not by enemies, but by his own men. Alexander stood silent for a long moment. This wasn't triumph, this was tragedy. He ordered Darius to be buried with full royal honors as if he were still a king. He punished the traitors brutally, not out of hatred, but to send a message to the world. Betrayal has no throne. With Darius gone, Persia no longer had a legitimate ruler to rally around. The world turned its eyes toward Alexander, the young foreign king who now controlled lands stretching farther than anyone in Greek history. But with greatness came shadows. Power began to change the atmosphere within the Macedonian ranks. Some generals who had fought beside Alexander since childhood struggled with jealousy, fear, and suspicion. They watched their king adopt Persian clothing, Persian customs, Persian courtiers. They thought he was drifting too far from the warrior simplicity of Macedonia. Whispers grew louder. Has Alexander become more king than companion? In response, Alexander became stricter. He demanded absolute loyalty. He executed conspirators. He pushed his army deeper east, always chasing something, not territory now, but legacy. From the shores of the Mediterranean to the mountains of Central Asia, people spoke one sentence again and again: Alexander cannot be stopped. But inside the young conqueror's heart, a storm was forming. He had crossed the world, defeated empires, rewritten maps, and yet he was not satisfied. Every new horizon felt like an invitation. Every conquered land looked like the beginning of another journey. Greatness can inspire, greatness can unite, but greatness can also consume. Alexander was no longer just the boy prince of Macedonia. He had become a figure of legend, admired, feared, debated, and followed by those who believed he could reshape destiny itself. And yet, destiny always has the final word. Because what awaited him ahead was not just victory, but the limits of ambition, the exhaustion of armies, and the realization that even the greatest conquerors are still mortal. With Darius gone and Persia subdued, the world felt as if it had changed forever. Alexander, once a young king chasing glory, now ruled lands stretching from Greece to Egypt, from Mesopotamia to the mountains of Central Asia. Ancient capitals bowed to him. Roads that once carried Persian armies now carried his banners. He had become, in the eyes of many, unstoppable. Yet history has a way of testing even its greatest figures. Alexander led his men further east, across rivers and jungles, facing new kingdoms, strange climates, endless battles. Victories continued, but something else grew alongside them: fatigue. Men who had marched thousands of miles began to ask themselves, how far is enough? What more does our king want? The further they traveled, the more Alexander seemed possessed by a single idea, pushing beyond the known world. He dreamed of reaching the great oceans, of uniting all lands under one rule, of carving his name into eternity. But his soldiers did not dream the same dream anymore. At the banks of the Hyphasis River in India, exhaustion finally spoke. The army, scarred, weary, and longing for home, refused to go farther. These were not cowards. They had fought in every climate, against every enemy, and survived. They simply had nothing left to give. Alexander tried persuasion. He tried speeches. He tried reminding them of their glory and destiny. But for the first time, his will met an immovable wall. And he listened. Reluctantly, painfully, he turned back. It was a rare moment where the conqueror bowed not to kings or armies, but to the limits of human endurance. On the journey home, storms, diseases, deserts, and politics took their toll. Friends died, generals plotted, loyalties cracked. The world Alexander had built was powerful, but fragile. Then, in Babylon, at only 32 years old, the man who had moved armies like storms suddenly fell ill. Fever rose, strength faded. The conqueror who had faced armies of hundreds of thousands now fought an enemy he could not see, could not stab, could not outmaneuver. As he lay surrounded by generals, soldiers, and frightened servants, one question began echoing through the palace. Who will inherit this? Legend says that when asked who should rule after him, Alexander whispered, "To the strongest." Whether those exact words were spoken or not, one truth became clear. His empire, as mighty as it seemed, depended on him, and only him. Soon after, Alexander the Great, the man who defeated armies larger than imagination, the man who brought down Persia, the man who made the world tremble, took his final breath. Silence filled Babylon, and across continents a new kind of battle began. Generals, friends, and rivals fighting over the shattered pieces of his legacy. Yet despite the chaos that followed, one reality remained unchanged. At Gaugamela, with only 47,000 men against 250,000, Alexander ended an empire. Not simply with strength, but with strategy, with discipline, with vision. He proved that leadership could outweigh numbers, that courage could challenge the impossible, and that history often turns not because of armies, but because of one mind willing to act at the decisive moment. Today we still remember the dust of that battlefield, the wedge charging toward a king, the empire collapsing in fear, and the young commander standing tall, rewriting the fate of nations. Because in the end, Alexander didn't just win battles, he changed the world.